Today guys, The Wandering Earth 2 流浪地球2 was released in the UK. So in this video here, I am going to be giving my honest review of just what I thought for this sci-fi film. Before I do though, I want to tell you a funny metaphor, and that is from one of my old managers that gave me some advice on the best way to give feedback, and that is the amusingly called shit sandwich. So the idea being good, bad, and then good again. So first of all, whilst we're on the subject of my metaphor of shit sandwich, what was the overall flavour of this sandwich? What did I think to the film? Now let me start by saying this film was gobsmackingly good. I really enjoyed my time at the cinema. The film was 3 hours of jam-packed action and all of it was entertaining. Before we start the review though, I want to tell you I'm not just giving praise to this film for no reason. I want to give you an honest admission. I did not like the first film as an overall visual spectacle. I thought it was fantastic graphics. I had huge respect for the author, Liu Cixin, because I'd read his book, The Three-Body Problem. I thought the overall concept was very engaging, but for me, the first film had many flaws. Mainly the storyline, which I thought was incredibly weak. I thought some of the scripting was awful to the point of boredom, and it didn't leave a mark on me, an indelible mark, to the extent that when I made a video the other day talking about the Wandering Earth 1, I essentially had forgot the whole of the plot, which is the worst critique you can give of a film. So with that said, you know my position coming into it, so that my praise that I'm about to give for the second film is authentic. So let me start with the positive, and I think one of the things that I enjoyed most in the film was its reflection of today's politics, today's issues, today's crises across society, and how they were reflected within the film in a very subtle but meaningful and powerful way. So a great example of this that was really poignant to me is when it talked about Earth's and its population's inability to deal with a problem that was 100 years away. Even though they could recognise there was going to be a solar flare, a solar crisis, because it was such a long time away, the people of the Earth could not agree. They were rioting against the UN. And that seemed to me so symptomatic of how we as humans are dealing with global warming, which, you know, we all recognise, all of the countries, governments and the peoples recognise it's an issue that we have to face as humanity. But as of yet, how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to apply resources, which countries are to blame, which countries need to do this and that, you know, there's still lots of conflict over that. And I think it really just showed the side of humanity that we have huge capacity and capability to come together and to collaborate and solve issues. But often we do that in a method that is very causing a friction. You know, we can agree that there is an issue out there, but actually determining how we resolve it and that pathway to go and deal with that issue is not always easy. And the film reflected that, and I felt like there was some sort of lesson that you could subtly take on board from the film. That being said, it wasn't too on the nose. It wasn't too forcing like political issues down your throat. It was a backdrop that made the film seem more relevant. Not only in a political sense, I also felt that the film touched on a lot of relevant issues that we're dealing with at the moment in terms of technology. It really feels in modern life that we're on the precipice of a fourth technological revolution. We're about to see the advantages that AI, that quantum computing, that biohacking, that solar energy, a range of these modern technologies can bring to human life. Yet on the contrary, it also feels, you know, that we're always on the precipice of an emergency, whether it's food supply or whether it's global warming or whether it's conflict. And I think the film really showed and demonstrated that whilst you're making huge progress, there's still always worries about that, how that progress is going to influence society, how we're going to control and use technology for the greater good. Some of the other hot button issues it touched on is automation. There was the scene where the workers were complaining because jobs had taken their jobs, or cyber attacks, or digital terrorism. Many of these things are a prominent thing that we're having to deal with in society at the moment and are only set to continue. So it was really interesting to see that they were represented within the film. I also really liked how the film was able to set the tone for the scenes. By that I mean there were light-hearted moments that were actually comedic and didn't come across as tacky and inappropriately placed. Particularly the fight scenes had a lot of levity and comedy in them. There were also really deeply emotional scenes that really were powerful. An example being the mother dying of cancer when she sat outside with her husband and the child accidentally knocks her wig off. Obviously she'd been having chemo surgery, and one of the negative impacts of that is you lose your hair, and the child didn't realise this, knocks the wig off to see the mother's bald head, and it was a really upsetting moment. He obviously didn't recognise his mother, she can't help it, you know, it's a natural process of going through chemo, and that was really impactful. Additionally, the scene where they were deciding the volunteers for the nuclear explosion, and the different nationalities started to put their hands up and say, everyone over 50 will put ourselves forward for essentially this suicide mission to save the earth. When they were all saying, like, we accept the mission, we over 50s will sacrifice our life for the young, that was a really poignant moment that was then followed up by when they were all on the planet, the surface of the moon, and they were all having to hand explode those nuclear explosions, and they were all going off at the same time, and the Chinese character said "Piao Liang." Like, that was a moment of such gravitas within the film that it really, really was enjoyable. And those scenes felt congruent within the film. They felt well placed. They didn't feel like they were pushed into the film to an illicit response. It just felt like it was a natural progression of the story. And I certainly felt that that wasn't the case in the first film. For me, the emotional underpinnings of the first film didn't seem consistent with what was going on in the storyline. But I really felt like they did in this film. Some of the scripting I thought was really fantastic, and I made a note of two of the lines that I thought were very powerful. The first one being, the solution to the crisis has become a crisis itself. That to me seems so symbolic of the way that, say for example, we've recently dealt with COVID being the crisis, but an additional crisis was how all the nations of the earth were going to deal with it and whether they could cooperate. So it was really moving that as a sentence for me. And secondly, the line, the day is always darkest before dawn, which is a phrase, a saying that is often ascribed to Winston Churchill, which as a Brit obviously very much resonated with me. Right, now onto some of the negative. I thought the voice acting at times was atrocious. I don't know whether this is going to be the same across all different versions of it. I was watching the version within the UK, and I don't know if many of my audience who typically are 中国人, 能说中文, will pick up on this. But often when language was spoke by people from different countries, so for example English, to my native ear it sounded very strange. They would often enunciate their words to an almost ridiculous degree. So for example, the scene where somebody was complaining that Beijing wasn't online, the actor was like, "Why have the Chinese failed us again?" It seemed really overly dragged out and overacted. Now I can understand this is a film that is made predominantly for a Chinese audience, and so when you're wanting to sell it to a Chinese audience, when it's the foreign tongue, you might speak it a bit more slower and more directly. It's absolutely fine, I completely get that. But to a native Brit, at times it did really jar with me. My second critique, I'm not actually sure whether I could describe it as a negative thing, because I actually felt it had a positive effect on me. And what I mean by that, because that does seem quite confusing, is at many times I did not understand what the story was going on about. It was so fast paced and there was so much going on that it was really difficult to actually track exactly what was going on in the story. So it left a layer of confusion in my brain as to what was happening at any time. Now, why do I say this was positive? Is actually because I couldn't understand it all. There was almost an excitement, a tension, a mystery, a dreamlike state of watching it, and an excitement that it was just action-packed throughout all the time. Actually, often our imagination is the most exceptional thing that we have. So if a storyline, you know what's happened and you know what's coming, it can often diminish the entertaining factor of it. So even though that was a critique, I don't think it was really tightly written how some other sci-fi novels that are really detailed and you know exactly what's going on and it's a really fleshed out world. Even though it wasn't as detailed as that and wasn't as clear as that, it actually still for me added to the spectacle. Now back to the positive of the shit sandwich. The visuals of this film were 10 out of 10. They were utterly stunning. And I think anybody that's watched the trailer or has even watched the first film will know that the visuals are incredible. But let me tell you, the visuals of the second film were a step up to the first one. Some of these scenic space shots of the moon, of the earth, of the spacecrafts were just breathtakingly good, were so inspiring, made you as a cinema viewer on the tiny piece of earth that you are in your local area seem so insignificant compared to the just ginormousness of space. And the film was fabulous in the way it catched that. And it wasn't just the space scenes, it was the scenes on Earth. One scene that comes to mind is when Yaya was fully coming online, the AI daughter, the scene where she was coming online and the camera was kind of spinning throughout the rooms, almost like an Alice in Wonder effect. It was going through different dimensions of physics and it was spinning, and it was all within the concept of her coming online. It was so visually spectacular. I wrote a note on my phone at the time, you've got to reference this in your review because it was so bloody good. Just back again for another second good point, just touching on how well it was written and how engaging the story was at times. I thought the scene where the main character was being interviewed by the digital AI robot, and it was a stress test and he was asking him difficult questions about his family, was just fabulous. It reminded me of my favourite film ever, 2001 Space Odyssey, because of the visuals of where you just have the camera lens of the robot interacting with the human. The interaction between the shot choice where it was changing from the human face back to just the digital lens that was black with the red dot of the computer really built tension in a very simple way. It was just one man sat in a room with a computer, and yet it built so much tension up until the point where he lost it with the questions that it were asking, the deeply personal questions it was asking about his family. I thought that scene was really well written. Finally, I think the most thought-provoking, the most virtuous and the most admirable part of the film that I want to give it credit for was just how much it made you think. It touched on so many topics that are issues for humanity, and it touched on so many topics about how we might come together to overcome them. I think its use of the symbology of the United Nations, the use of the symbology of people from all different countries, the very many international shots where it would very quickly go through a lot of different nations and races and their responses to the current events. And many characters had quite persuasive lines where they talked about, you know, we choose hope, or we choose to come together, 我们需要团结. All of these sorts of things, I thought that it was a really uplifting film spiritually. Often when you watch sci-fi films, they're often about dystopian futures where, yes, humans have destroyed the planet, but they've created something awful and we're all scrambling for resources and like fighting each other, and maybe zombies exist and this type of thing. And actually this film kind of gave a pathway of how we might resolve a global issue. I thought the acting was fabulous as well. Andy Lau and Wu Jing were really, really excellent as the two lead characters. Particularly Andy Lau and the relationship that he had with daughter. I thought that was a really strong part of the film. So all in all, a really excellent film. I'm really pleased for Liu Cixin. I'm really pleased for myself. I feel like finally there's a sci-fi film that's come out of China that I can recommend to all of my friends and it be fantastic. It be an action-packed, well-written, visual spectacular with great acting and good story writing. And the first film wasn't that. It had been deleted from my mind. And I'm excited about all the new editions that are coming out of the Three Body Problem, but they've not really hit the market yet. But this, Wandering Earth 2, I think it may well take the world by storm. And what I want to tell you to back... Oh, sorry, my phone just went off. That's AI for you. And what I want to tell you to back that thought up as well is it's been really well received, both with Chinese audiences and with Western audiences. Its current score on International Movie Database is 8.0, which, to give you an impression of just how high that is, Forrest Gump, which is one of the most loved all-time films, is on 8.8, so it's only slightly lower than that. And on the domestic review site Douban, it's got 8.2, so it's not just myself that's enjoyed it, it's clear that it's been welcomed by the audience. So yeah, final summary, 流浪地球2, Wandering Earth 2, go watch it. You don't even really need to watch the first one. The order of the films is kind of backwards. It's still shocking to me that the first one is done by the same director in the company, because it's like night and day. The second one is so good, and the first one is so forgettable for me that I don't even want to mention it. But you've got to go see this film. Don't even think of it as Wandering Earth 2. Just think of it as a standalone film. It's so good. And you're just going to get 3 hours of bombastic, exciting, 100 miles an hour sci-fi thriller with emotional scenes, with light-hearted scenes, with visual, beautiful scenes of the Earth and the space and all of these types of things. And I can't recommend it highly enough. So go see it now. Right, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this film review. I hope you can give a like on the video and also comment telling me whether you enjoyed it. What did you think was best about the Wandering Earth 2? And I shall see you next time. All right, bye bye, 再见啊.